Why does a man, wrongfully accused, when given a chance to defend himself before the seats of power, choose to remain silent? Why does the one held by Christians to be the Word made flesh not deign to speak a word in his own defense, when any word he uttered could have burned through the darkness of injustice? What does it mean, in the heavy hush of a Roman hall, to trust in the will of God more than in the force of one's own tongue? Let us walk now into a world of shadow and flickering torchlight. Within the marble halls of Jerusalem's praetorium, we hear only the shuffling of sandaled feet, the mutters of watchful soldiers, the nervous breaths of rulers who do not know that history holds its own counsel. We see Pilate seated, a Roman with the burdens and the calculations of empire in his gaze. Before him stands a man not trembling, not protesting, but radiating a silence weighted with the mystery of heaven. The air is tense, with the faint incense of Passover rising from the distant temple courts, and with centuries of prophecy trembling, fulfilled or withheld, in the quiet of this dawn. It is in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 27, verses 11 through 14, that this moment is painted for us. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You have said so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Let us breathe in the silent air of that ancient tribunal, and let us lay our own questions beside the hush. Why this silence? What does it mean to speak, and to trust in one who speaks even when human voices fail? We begin as seekers, drawn not to settle the mystery, but to dwell within it, and to listen for the voice of the Spirit that often whispers when tongues grow still. As the first blush of dawn colors the stone alleys of Jerusalem, crowds begin to gather. The city is heavy with the anticipation of festival and the tension of Roman watchfulness. The temple looms in the near distance, golden under the rising sun, set apart by its gates and its veils. Just as within these walls stands one who is set apart in ways the crowd cannot fathom. Jesus of Nazareth has been taken under the shroud of night, betrayal's kiss still lingering on his cheek, the rough grip of the temple guard now fading to the chill of Roman authority. He is brought at daybreak from the house of Caiaphas, the high priest, to the headquarters of the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate. The charge: he calls himself king. It is a political accusation, one that will draw the hand of Rome against him, for kingship is a challenge not just to Jewish leaders fearful for their nation, but to emperors whose coins bear their likenesses, who tolerate no rival thrones. Matthew tells it simply. Now Jesus stood before the governor, a phrase that leaves unspoken the weeks and years that led to this morning, the teachings, the healings, the words that stirred crowds and unsettled rulers, the beatitudes whispered on Galilean hillsides, the prayers poured out in olive gardens under the watch of sleepless stars. Pilate, robed in Roman authority and the weariness of another execution at the edge of empire, fixes his eyes upon this prisoner. He asks, "Are you the king of the Jews?" A question weighted with both political anxiety and personal curiosity. For Pilate, though not a Jew, senses that something here exceeds the usual squabbles he must settle. Jesus replies, not with a protest or a self-exoneration, but with the enigmatic words, "You have said so." It is neither a denial nor a clear claim. He does not grasp the title Pilate offers. He does not cast it aside either. The ambiguity itself is a kind of mirror, reflecting Pilate's own uncertainty and our own. Who is this man, and what kind of kingship stands before us, silent and unarmed? But the interrogation does not end there. Pilate, hearing the charges now shouted by the chief priests and elders, expects a defense. Temple authorities rehearse every accusation: blasphemy, perversion, claims to authority. Perhaps their voices echo around the stone pillars, reverberating with the weight of religious tradition, the desperation to maintain order, the fear that one man's claims could topple centuries of custom, and the precarious peace with Rome. Yet Jesus, the one called Rabbi, Healer, Prophet, perhaps Messiah, answers nothing. Pilate's voice grows more urgent, almost incredulous. Do you not hear how many things they testify against you? The political path is clear. A prisoner given chance to answer either pleads for mercy or rebuffs the claims. Silence in a Roman court is unheard of. It is dangerous, provocative, and, on this morning, deeply unsettling. The historian's mind wonders. Why does he not speak? Does the fear of the crowd stilling for an answer not tempt him? Is he calculating, waiting, or resigned? Or is this, as will later be spoken by the earliest church, the fulfillment of prophecy? For in Isaiah 53, it is said that the suffering servant was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Matthew lingers over the silence. He gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Let us now linger there with Pilate, our own hearts beating in the uneasy hush. What is it that amazes the Roman? Is it the refusal to defend oneself, a breach of Roman custom and even of normal human instinct? Is it the assurance, the strangely unshakable calm radiating from this Galilean, who does not bargain for his life or beg for justice from a system that offers little? Perhaps we glimpse in Pilate's amazement something deeper, that a man can trust so fully in the purposes of God that even injustice cannot touch the heart's repose. That silence, resisted by the proud, but chosen by the meek and strong, can be an act of spiritual defiance or surrender, or both at once. Let us understand the context. The Passover approaches. The city swells with pilgrims, with tensions old and new. The religious leaders are alert. Any uprising, any claim to messiahship could trigger Roman wrath. They bring Jesus to Pilate, not because Rome cares for their laws, but because Rome alone holds the power to crucify. The charges must be political. He claims to be a king. In the Roman world of legal proceedings, an accused man is expected to answer. Defense, self-justification, these are not only legal tactics, but physical instincts to survive. The silence of Jesus astonishes not only Pilate, but the rhythm of judicial process itself. And what of Jesus himself? The years have not worn him down. The night before, in Gethsemane's garden, he prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." Now, in the full view of power, he stands in obedience, surrendered not to Rome or the Sanhedrin, but to God. We step back to the prophecies, to Isaiah, to Psalm 38, where David prays, "I am like a deaf man. I do not hear, like a mute man who does not open his mouth. I have become like a man who does not hear, and in whose mouth are no rebukes. But for you, O Lord, do I wait? It is you, O Lord my God, who will answer. Is it possible that Jesus, in this silence, aligns himself with the deep tradition of those who trust God to vindicate them, even when voices cry out for self-defense? Let us examine the gentle paradox here. Jesus, who elsewhere pleads for the voiceless, heals the silenced, and shatters the shackles of unjust systems, in this moment refuses speech. Is he not, in that hush, taking upon himself the fullness of human vulnerability, the fate of the innocent unheard, the agony of the righteous condemned? The silence is not passivity nor approval of injustice. It is, perhaps, the deepest protest, not against Rome or the priests, but against the fallen order which thinks it can define truth by trial. In being silent, he allows the injustice to exhaust itself. He becomes, in that self-restraint, the lamb rather than the lion. Consider, too, the cultural nuance layered into this episode. For a Jew, the High Court, the Sanhedrin, was the place where truth was to be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, where justice was, at least in theory, to be the reflection of God's own character. The proceedings here are already broken. Witnesses do not agree. The timing is hasty. The desire for execution overtakes the pursuit of truth. To answer would be to participate in the sham. To remain silent is, perhaps, to place himself outside the boundaries of the world's broken justice. The early Christian communities reflected on this moment with awe. In Peter's first letter, written to believers suffering unjust persecution, he says, "When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly." 1 Peter 2:23, the lesson is not merely one of passivity, but of radical trust in God's timing, in God's vindication, in the sovereignty that no earthly court can overturn. Is this not, then, the heart of the mystery? When pressed by injustice, when falsely accused or misunderstood, what does it mean to trust in God? Is the way of Jesus always to speak, to confront, to explain, to justify? Or is there a time to bear witness through silence, letting one's life and obedience speak more powerfully than any self-defense? Pilate is confounded. The crowds, longing for spectacle or violence, are denied the comfort of a category. Jesus, silent, stands between the accusations and Pilate's questions, offering, in that gap, neither his own rescue nor the rescue Pilate cannot fathom. He embodies, in this threshold, the long centuries of Israel's suffering, the pain of those silenced by power, the hope of those waiting for God to speak. Yet in this hush, Scripture is, in fact, being heard. Isaiah again whispers in the background. He was oppressed, and he suffered, yet he did not open his mouth. The fulfillment is subtle, but unmistakable. The pattern of God's suffering servant is not to overpower, but to bear, willingly, consciously, in faith that God will bring resurrection from silence and vindication from shame. There is an echo, too, of the Psalms, when the psalmist says, "For God alone my soul waits in silence. From him comes my salvation." David knew the pain of being falsely pursued, of having his words twisted by enemies and friends alike, of finding that only in radical silence before God could his soul find rest. The Church, in centuries to follow, has lingered over these verses. In the silence of Jesus, martyrs have found courage. In the hush before unjust courts, whether in colosseums, inquisitions, or even our own unseen tribulations, People of faith have learned that there is a deeper voice than self-vindication, a greater hope than the world's fleeting verdicts. Yet let us pause and confess that silence is not always holy, not always the path of faith. Sometimes silence, chosen out of fear or complicity, can be sin. But here, in this singular hour, the silence of Jesus is chosen in communion with the Father, as a sign that God alone is the judge whose verdict matters. His silence prepares the cross, and beyond the cross, the empty tomb. Pilate's amazement is mirrored by our own. Why deny oneself the right to self-defense or even righteous anger? Why let the false witness stand unopposed? Perhaps the answer, in part, is that Jesus is living out a trust deeper than circumstance, knowing that suffering for righteousness' sake is never the end of the story, that the injustices of earth are not the last word of heaven. Some gentle speculation is possible and necessary. Might Jesus' silence also serve to expose the emptiness of the charges against him, the impotence of human courts before the mystery of God? Might it allow the events to unfold as they must, leading not to avoidance of suffering, but to its redemptive embrace? We cannot say for certain, but in the hush, a door is open to a faith that does not always need to explain, a hope that can rest in God's sovereignty even when words fail. We find, too, that Jesus is not always silent before authority. When he stands before the Sanhedrin, he does respond. You will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power. To Pilate, he gives only the faintest affirmation, "You have said so," and then withdraws into quiet. The difference marks something profound. Before those who ought to know, he anchors his identity in Scripture. Before those entrusted with mere temporal power, he entrusts his case to God alone. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus chooses his words with care. He speaks with authority to storms and demons, to the sick and broken, to those gasping for mercy. Here, words fall away, not in defeat, but in defiant obedience to a purpose surpassing this moment's injustice. As the trial moves forward, Pilate will continue to search for an accusation worthy of death. Jewish leaders will press for a sentence that Rome alone can inflict. In the background, the crowd stirs, Barabbas waits in chains, and the cross, rough-hewn, stands in readiness. Through it all, the silence of Jesus reverberates, a silence that is not void, but a canvas on which the will of God is being painted, stroke by patient stroke. We draw nearer to the climax of this moment, where silence meets its purpose in the will of the Father. In the hush, God is not absent. The silence chosen by Jesus is not abandonment, but a signpost. It is the silence that comes before resurrection, the silence of seeds in the earth, of prayers unspoken, of hope that is hidden before it is revealed. If we listen, there are echoes here for our own journeys. When faced with accusations, when the world seems to demand constant justification, when injustice rises before us like an ancient court, what does it mean to follow the silent Christ? Are there times when our defense is best left unspoken, not in apathy, but in the fierce trust that God is judge and defender? Are there moments when our witness is strongest, not in cleverness or clamor, but in the peace that surpasses understanding? Scripture does not answer every question. It holds us here in the tension. We crave answers. Why did he not speak? Why did he not seek release? Why must the innocent suffer? Yet in these questions, we learn the humility of faith, the willingness to walk with Christ even when the road is veiled. From the silence before Pilate arises a model for all who follow. Trust in the midst of injustice is not complacency nor defeat. It is a refusal to let the world's broken verdicts define our worth, a surrender of ultimate outcomes to the judge of all hearts. It is a courage that does not depend on victory. It is a hope that outlasts suffering. The ancient world, for all its power and pride, stands baffled by this man who does not plead, who does not threaten, who neither crumbles nor conquers as men expect. His kingship is not of this world, not measured in words nor retorts, but in the unshakable obedience that will carry him to a cross. As the torches flicker low and the Roman governor sits in amazement, we are invited to dwell in this mystery, not to resolve it, but to let it resolve us. The silence is not empty. It holds the fullness of trust, the resonance of prophecies come true, the promise that on the other side of injustice, God still speaks. And so we close our meditation in the gentle hush that lingers after the storm of accusation. The silence of Jesus before Pilate is both wound and wonder, a wound that draws our own cries for justice, a wonder that calls us to trust wheresoever God may lead. For each of us, there will be moments when words are not enough, when explanations cannot redeem the shadows. In those hours, may the example of Christ call us not to despair, but to the peace that comes from surrender, to the hope that flourishes unseen beneath the soil of holy silence. If this reflection has touched your own journey, if you have felt the hush amid injustice, the struggle to trust in the quiet valley, I invite you to share your thoughts, your own questions, or the places where Scripture's silences have met your life. What have you discovered about faith amid accusation, or hope when the world offers no easy answers? If you long to walk further into the hidden corners of the ancient world, to sit with the mysteries that do not yield easily to speech, I invite you to return, to subscribe, to seek, to rest alongside all who wander quietly before the living Word. May the peace of Christ, the Prince of Silence and of Song, be with you in every questioning hour. May his trust, deeper than speech, bear you onward through every shadow. Blessings, until we meet again in the hush where God's presence dwells.